Welcome to the Set to Lead podcast, the online mentoring platform for emerging and current leaders. My name is Marianne Samdi, leadership coach and talent development expert, and I will be your host. Welcome to the show, Julie.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for coming.
It is fun to be with you.
Yes. The topic of our show today is going to be diversity and inclusion in the workplace. But before we get started, tell us a little bit about how you were led to this field.
Well, I had a journey in corporate America once upon a time. I spent about 12 years doing people leadership stuff in different industries and functional areas, and checked off all the boxes you check off in that corporate ladder, and found myself at the end of those 12 years deeply unhappy and could not figure out why. And then I was fortunate enough to meet some allies and people that helped me along the way in figuring out that your purpose is to help others, and specifically women and those that maybe don't see themselves reflected in organizations, much like I did in my corporate career. And that is when I started Next Pivot Point, my business. And I've been at it for 6 years, really focused on how to develop every leader so they can lead inclusively and support true diversity in the workplace, while making sure that all voices are heard and people are seen and have a sense of deep belonging in their work. So that is me.
Well, I'm really happy that you found your purpose.
Me too. There are so many people. I mean, that's one thing I help people with is how do you even articulate that? I mean, it's such a big, daunting question. What's your purpose in life? And what do you want to be when you grow up? And we start asking our children early on. And, there's so many different things you can do. Life is full of tons of pivot, and you got to pay attention to your energy. You got to listen to the people around you that know you well. I was lucky that I had some people that held up the mirror for me to see, hey, you're really good at this. Did you happen to notice that? Like, no, I didn't. I was kind of doubting myself, like many of us do, or we think we can't monetize our purpose, or somehow that's for other people to do, not for me. And I certainly lived in that world for far too long before really discovering the magic of you can do it. You are meant to do this, and absolutely it will be something you can support your family doing, in fact. So I'm very proud to be able to do that and feel great privilege in the work I do.
Excellent. And now that you've found your purpose and you're here, why does diversity and inclusion matter so much in building a successful team?
Yeah, well, the data shows, so the two key pieces I always like to point out to people, I assume everyone knows this, but I guess not everybody does, is first and foremost, there's data that shows decision-making is better when you have diversity and inclusion. So they've measured peers in the same industry, side-by-side comparisons on decision-making being 87% better with diverse and inclusive teams. And also revenue numbers happen to be higher. So 19% higher in revenue profitability numbers. I mean, you can get 20 to 40% higher profitability just by tackling the two biggest dimensions of diversity, but by no means the only, race and gender. So it's really powerful. And for your listeners that want to dig in more to the data and the business case behind it, Harvard Business Review is publishing constantly data on diversity and inclusion. So there's no shortage of articles with studies and dollar amounts and figures there, as well as McKinsey and Company reports on gender very regularly with their women report, as well as Catalyst and the Pew Research Center. So there's no shortage of data, but unfortunately, even given that business case and that data, the numbers are pretty stagnant from a representation perspective in corporate America. And so we have a lot of work to do. And I would argue bringing the human case about people feeling included in the workplace and the deeper human why behind it is what's going to take us forward.
Mm-hmm. It is. It's like you said, it's powerful, the positive impact D&I can make in the workplace. Mm-hmm. The term implicit bias and unconscious bias has been trending for some time. Wouldn't you agree?
Oh yeah, it's a hot topic. It's maybe 5 to 10 years ago, depending on your organization and how global it is. The global companies are usually a little bit ahead of the game.
Yeah.
Unconscious bias trading got really popular in corporate America, and the term got thrown around a lot, which is great. I mean, I think it's a good thing for people to be aware of, right? Because we all have bias, and it is unconscious, right? We don't even know what's happening. So some good messages. The problem is to start the conversation there. It's not the most welcoming message. Hey, there's something wrong with you and you better fix it. So
Yeah.
I did get my certification in a few years ago and learned a lot about my biases. I'm not perfect. I harbor them as well, and I've got to work on them every day. So it's a hot topic. It continues to be a hot topic. And for your listeners out there that want to gauge theirs, a great tool that we could certainly share the link with them is implicit.harvard.edu. Again, Harvard does some great groundbreaking research on this, and they've been doing it for decades. You can measure your implicit bias. It's called the Implicit Association Test, the IAT. And it's free. It's anonymous. It takes 10 minutes. There's 12 different categories that you can assess, and you will learn something. I promise. So take a few of them and spend some time. You can do it on your phone. It is well worth it for people that want to get to learn more about their own self-awareness around bias.
For those that may not know, what is the difference between implicit bias and unconscious bias?
The terms are synonymous. I don't know why they use them interchangeably. It's, the diversity dictionary is robust and ever-changing. I use the term unconscious bias, but Harvard, when they first started doing this, I think it was 25 years ago, it was in the 90s, they called it implicit bias. So that's where the conversation truly did start, but it's evolved and the term unconscious bias has taken hold, but they really mean the same thing. They mean essentially it's things you think that you may not even say or express in behavior, but their unconscious bias is really just your brain's recognition of a pattern. And based on that pattern, our brain really likes to make assumptions. So somebody may have a certain skin color, for example. We might make an assumption about their socioeconomic status, or they fit in or not. Our brain's categorizing it behind the scenes without us even knowing. And then if we're not careful about that bias, we might actually behave, say, or do something that's consistent with that bias. So just because you have bias doesn't mean you're a bad person by any means. It just means you got things you have to work on to kind of intervene with that bias, stop the autopilot, the unconscious part, turn on your conscious brain to manage your behavior so that it doesn't reinforce stereotypes. It doesn't reinforce that pattern thinking that once upon a time was super helpful for survival when we were fighting saber-toothed tigers, but in the 2020 world, not as helpful to judge other people that we don't really know.
Well, thanks for that clarity, Julie. Mm-hmm. I appreciated that. I thought there was something different between the two.
Yeah, most people do, and it's this constantly evolving diversity set of terms. There's terms like intersectionality, for example, that just throw people for a loop. And it really, if you think about the simplicity of that term, intersection of two or more diversity dimensions. So it's things like, oh, I am of a different race and gender. So there's these terms everywhere that we use. And as D&I practitioners, a lot of times we can lose people in the words that we use. So really, good reminder on level setting, and not everybody's using these words every day. And let's make sure, I'm a big fan of bringing our allies into the conversation. Let's make sure that we're not using that alienate people. Let's educate people and meet them where they're at along the way. So that's a very fair and very honest question.
Okay. So a common bias that I've noticed in corporate America is in the recruitment space. There's a popular philosophy out there with many companies to hire based on culture fit, quote unquote. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, the quote unquote part of that's pretty telling, right? So what we know about that jargon, when those words are used as an assessment, it's almost always used negatively, that this person is not a cultural fit. And a lot of times that's code language for something else. They don't fit in here. And why? Is it because they look different? Is it because they have a different background? Is it because they're from a different country? Is it because they didn't go to school where everyone went to school here? There's so many affinity biases. This is another term for the diversity dictionary. We prefer people that are like us, and that's called affinity bias. So you probably, if you take an inventory of the people you spend time with, we're all doing this all the time as human beings, surrounding ourselves with like-minded people. There's some beauty in that. It makes life a lot easier when everyone's kind of on the same page as you, but you don't learn as much. And organizations have been doing this for some time, recruiting at the same schools, for example, making sure people have the same set of experience and backgrounds. And what you're doing is signaling that that's what cultural fit is the same. And if you're different, then you don't fit in. You're not a cultural fit. What's a better way to say that is to have core values that you can actually assess cultural fit on. And these are behaviors. A lot of companies have them. They live on a wall, maybe on a website somewhere, and they're rarely used. The best companies actually use them as hiring criteria and separation criteria, and they're how everybody's expected to behave inside the organization. And when you get them down to 3 or 5 core values, right, and more profound than just trust and teamwork, but we want people that take a deep sense of ownership in their work, or we really want creative thinking, whatever it is. When you can assess those behaviors, that you make it a lot less about what school people went to, their race, their gender, assumptions about them that you don't even know to be true. So it's harder to use that cultural fit lens, and it's a lot easier to say, are they a core value fit? So that's a better framework to use, and it helps limit bias in the process.
Interesting. I like that. Make sure that they're a core value fit.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Nice. Are there other types of biases we should avoid in the workplace?
Yeah, I mean, the big one, so the Harvard assessment, I like to use the word assessment. They have test in their language. Again, this is, a bit dated, but they've evolved along the way. They have 12 different categories. So I think a lot of people go to race, gender because they think they can see them. By the way, you can't always see those things. But most people want to know, do I have racial bias? Am I a racist? And that doesn't mean if you have racial bias that you are a racist. That's the whole difference between your bias and your behavior. Same with gender. It doesn't mean you're a sexist, for example. It just means you have some bias to work on and to be aware of. But there's other factors. Age, little known fact, is actually the biggest area of bias. So most people, over 90%, have bias towards age and prefer young people to those that are older. And I was talking with a gentleman. He said he was 58 years old and he's loving doing phone screens now and not in person or video calls because they can't see how old he is.
Right.
You talk about code language. He's been told a lot of things like, oh, we need someone that's fast moving and up to speed with technology and all this code language for not getting jobs. And people are just making that assumption based on the way his age. Age is a huge one. Ageism is very much affecting the senior part of our population, those with disabilities, those in the LGBTQ plus community. It's everywhere. And so what we know about bias is the more people that are like us, the more we think we actually know them and that we can trust them. And while that may kind of be true, it's a nice shortcut, I guess, into trusting somebody. You don't really know that's true, right? You don't really know a person. You just know that they have things in common with you. So a way to kind of check yourself and challenge yourself is take an inventory of the people you spend a lot of time with. And aside from your family, maybe your coworkers, you have to, but the people you choose to spend time with, how different are they? Have you collected different people with different types of experiences, maybe from different parts of the world or country at least, or no languages, grew up with different socioeconomic backgrounds? I mean, you name it, you fill in the variables, and make sure that you're really spending time with people different. That your biases kind of start to go away. The more you can retrain your brain through experiences and surrounding yourself with people different than you to undo some of those stereotypes and undo some of that pattern thinking. The more you expose yourself to new patterns and new types of people that break down those biases and kind of flip them on their head.
Julie, are there some additional ways we can build inclusive leadership skills and avoid some of these bias situations?
Yeah, I got a ton of ideas on that one. I have written books about the topic, and my work early on started from a gender perspective and talking about men as allies for women. But now I've pivoted and really talked more about overall diversity and inclusion and the importance of all people, being seen, heard, and feeling belonging. What we know is that leaders that lead inclusively far outperform those that don't. And oftentimes, these are the middle managers inside organizations that they're kind of getting pressure from the top, the C-suite, the VPs, saying you need to be more diverse and inclusive. And, it oftentimes feels like a quota situation. And then you have the frontline employees that, assuming that they're Gen Z or the younger demographic, a lot of times they kind of get it, right? They grew up in the most generation that might ever exist. We don't know, but that to date they are. And they get it and they expect it in the workplace. And then there's this murky middle, 5, 10, 15 years before D&I was a big thing, that they're clueless, to be quite honest. And I mean that in a good way. We have an opportunity to educate and meet our allies where they're at. So good news is inclusive leadership absolutely can be learned. Bad news is it's a journey and it ends. So you got to keep being curious. And inclusive leaders, when I say that, there's attributes that are measurable. Self-awareness. Do they know who they are and who they are not? Do they have candid conversations with people? Are you really honest and clear and transparent with people and give them feedback and coach them to success? And do they create space for others to feel seen, heard, and feel that sense of belonging in the workplace? Do they know about their biases and manage the moment? Are they curiously learning about people different than themselves from a gender, a race, a sexual orientation perspective? And are they engaging in the conversation, or are they staying on the outside of the conversation? And easy ways to do that in corporate America are, employee resource groups, getting involved in those, going to conferences, whether be virtual now, they're still going to exist in the future, but finding ways to explore it. And certainly Lead Like an Ally goes into kind of 6 key pieces for an inclusive workplace. And at the heart of it all is the manager, and making sure the manager is leading inclusively and modeling the way.
There we go. That magic word that begins with an M, the managers. The managers are the key.
And often the most forgotten. A lot of times we don't the manager and this stuff. I call it the murky middle. Like, it's somebody that's kind of like, what am I supposed to do? What am I supposed to say? No one gave me these tools. By the way, 2/3 of us are white men that feel like we're not supposed to talk about this. So it's a recipe for disaster. And this is where we are at still, right? Knowing all this great data business case that we talked about, we're still not addressing the real part of the problem in organizations, that middle band that really wants to be a part of the conversation. They just don't know what to say and they don't know what to do. So education and awareness is what is necessary now more than ever.
Julie, have you noticed any diversity and inclusion elements that sometimes are overlooked when it comes to influencing inclusion? For example, I know we had a conversation before this show, and we were talking about things like mental health and some other elements that I'd love for you to share with the audience.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. Something like mental health has quite a stigma, right? And as a Gen Xer and certainly baby boomers, this is not something you talk about in the workplace, right? It's like shunned, and there's so much shame around it. We know disability. So this is so compelling for a business case perspective that 1 in 4 Americans identify as having a disability. And the overwhelming majority of that number, it's a mental health situation. So it may be something like I have ADHD, dyslexia, the list goes on, right? It could be something that you can see. A lot of times it's something that's non-apparent that you can't see. And so this is a new wrinkle to the conversation, is when you recognize 1 in 4, right? 1 in the 4 people you work with, chances are, have something about themselves that they're probably not bringing to the table or sharing. I just talked with a senior leader of an organization that said she has dyslexia. She's had it her whole life, never told anyone she worked with, and is now a VP of an organization focused on people, and said, I finally feel safe to tell the first time ever in my 25 plus year career, I could tell my team that. And think about what all the other organizations she was working for, what they missed by not knowing that about her. And that's the key. That's the key to all this. The more we don't know about our teams, the more we don't know about people we work with as human beings, what motivates, what makes them tick, what makes them different, what makes them uniquely adding value to our organization, the more we're just missing out on. Because we know this about humans. If you don't feel like you trust others, that you can be your full self at work, and you have to, another keyword for the dictionary, cover. The word covering means to minimize or maximize a dimension about yourself to fit in. Then there's no way you're producing at the highest rate or the best quality, or certainly giving your work your all. If you could, right? Think about it, a world where you could be full self at work. Imagine what's possible. And I didn't see that difference. No idea how much I was holding back and just going through the motions until I started my own business. And you don't have to wait to do something grand for that to happen. It's amazing. One of the key attributes that I talk about is vulnerability, stepping into it and being vulnerable and sharing something about yourself that's hard. Other people are going to mirror that. They're going to share things about themselves that's hard, and you give everybody the ability to jump into the conversation and have it together. So that's something great now more than ever. Being human, bringing your full human self to the workplace is absolutely important.
Why do you think she didn't feel safe until now to share that info about herself?
Well, I think especially if you want to advance in your career, you could be labeled as the person that has this issue, fill in the blank challenge, People make a lot of assumptions, and then with really good intentions, they'll say things like, oh, be careful, she can't read this, so let's do it a certain, different way, or, oh, she might have trouble with those slides, I'll just do them for her. Those types of things might be assumed, that someone needs special treatment and accommodations, when a lot of times we have no idea of the accommodations that someone might be needed. And so I think people are afraid of that label, of wearing that label for their careers, and it limiting their mobility inside an organization. From a gender perspective, same thing happens to women as mothers in the workplace. Oh, she doesn't want to travel because she has small children. She can't stay after hours because she has kids in daycare. Good intentions, but, by leaving women out of those common workplace activities like traveling and social time, we're not letting them have access to the same opportunities and the networks that are formed in those activities, and the promotions and pay increases that come with those activities. So good intentions, but really bad impact to that behavior. And so being really careful, if you're trying to protect somebody that's different, you actually may be part of the problem, right? You might be making it worse. So don't make that assumption. And if you have a workplace where people are bringing forward tough stuff like this, chances are you're doing really well with inclusion.
Exactly. But let's say that you're not really doing well with inclusion. How do you create that safe space to have team members share and to build the rapport you need to make people feel like they belong?
Yeah.
People have a problem with creating that type of safe area, don't you think?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And that's a lot of time. My work is to come into organizations and help create that psychological safety. I call them brave places now, because safe places has kind of an interesting connotation to it. And sometimes, it is psychologically safe, but there's going to be some stuff shared, and there might be some tears, and there might be some emotions, and that comes with the territory of bravery. And so I think having brave conversation now as a leader helps to facilitate and crack the door open to inclusion. And that really, especially having pulse check, temperature check conversations, whatever you want to call them, daily huddles. I know a lot of companies are doing all sorts of different things, happy hour, virtual conference, whatever. When you team together, just have a couple questions and maybe send them in a video so they have time to think about them. But I want to check on everybody and make sure everybody's okay. Right. Or I just want to see how you're doing. Honestly, really, I really want to know how you're doing as a human being right now. And maybe that's the first question is, how are you actually doing? And underscore the word actually or really or whatever you want to do to emphasize authenticity.
Mhm.
And then listen. And as a leader, you don't have to have the solution. You don't, and please don't make it about you. Oh yeah, my daughter, keeps interrupting me at work too. It's not about you. Stop, listen, learn, be curious, and just acknowledge, wow, I'm glad you shared that with me. I didn't know that about you. Thank you for sharing. And then that question can really open the door to a series of questions about, hey, now's a great level set time or a pivot forward time for our organization. What are you liking about the workplace? What are you not liking? What can we do more of? What can we do less of? There's honest conversations and preempting it with like, I may not be able to solve all of this, right? We're not going to make the workplace perfect overnight. But if we were to get better as a team, if I were to get better as a leader, what would that look like? Paint that picture for me. Those conversations, so deep, so profound. They unlock people's authenticity, like real self. And when people can feel seen and heard in those environments, they get that sense of belonging, which is what inclusion's all about. So I think having honest conversations and just having some of those conversation starters in your back pocket when I'm blind, and it's scary because you don't know what people say, but that's the beautiful part of it. People usually tell you like golden information that you didn't know until you asked.
These tips were great, Julie.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. I think this is a perfect place to close the conversation. I appreciate you stopping by today. Tell us how we can follow your work.
Yes, thank you. Well, I have beefing up my resources page with complimentary workbooks, podcast episodes, videos, lessons of your own. So you can find a plethora of free resources at nextpivotpoint.com. I invite you to check in with me there. I respond to every message I get at julie@nextpivotpoint.com. And I post daily on all the social channels, including LinkedIn is where I'm most known. And just look for me there, Julie Kratz, Kratz. I'd love to connect with you and learn more about you.
Thanks, Julie, again. Have a great one.
Thanks for having me, Marianne.
You're welcome.